Hi again. I'm checking in again with you to go over just a couple of key points from Chapter 3, the reading. I've responded to most of your posts online, but I wanted to call attention to a couple of things that are important in Chapter 3 and that will get increasingly important as we move through to Chapter 4 and move out of our camera assignment to interactivity. First of all, as many of you noted, Burnett starts this chapter with talking about the known and the unknown. And I think it's important to note that the distinction he's trying to make is that while much of the arts and sciences and indeed recording technologies were an attempt to show us something about the visible world that we couldn't see, that paradigm no longer holds up because images don't just show us reality, but they can be transformed and into a sort of type of new reality. And so the line between the virtual and the real is increasingly problematic. This point is really raised well later in the chapter when he talks about kind of the telephone technology that on the one hand, it seems to connect humans. On the other hand, it acts as a mediator. So all we get is a person's voice and we don't get their gestures or their look. I think so again, although, and I think I can demonstrate this pretty well if as I did last time when I put on the special effects when I filmed the last video. That's not representing anything about the world. You're not seeing me, you're seeing me mediated. And this is actually mediated as well, but it's just a little bit harder to distinguish. Pay special attention also to his discussion of the potential that lies in microcultures. So even though now Facebook has become kind of ubiquitous and many people keep all their photos there, microcultures offer the potential that small groups can get together and actually accomplish things using digital technologies that they simply couldn't do. His example is a small cinema with 25 seats that actually can be filled and actually can be part of a network and have some political weight behind it. Another notion is his discussion of the ways in which emergent technologies are always met with suspicion on about page 64 and 65, particularly in historic examples, Galileo and the church, and how they shake up our kind of really deep-seated notions of what can be. And that at the same time we have these emergent technologies that record images, there's also images that are acting as evidence for our knowledge. So the continuum of the virtual and the real that he starts getting into on page 66 and 67 is, again, another important addition that the difference between information and knowledge is one that we should really consider. So while computers can make data available, as he says on page 69, knowledge entails a knower. So computers on their own do nothing. It's the human use of computers that are important. And then finally, on page 70, he ends this chapter by really calling for a change in our thinking about how we archive and store the history of human life and our existence upon it. As computers become little sets of personal archives, who's going to be in charge of not only the type of archive, as we saw in the last chapter, the notion of compression and how it reduces the information of an analog photograph. So that's one important aspect, is how we're going to store these and what we see as being realistic representations of analog technologies. But then also there's really an ethical dimension about whose lives get to be documented and which of the Facebook images will actually be preserved for the future. So those are all some interesting issues that he raises. This is a short chapter. It will build well into the next chapter when the discussion moves towards vantage point, and that reality changes based on where you are in relationship to the images that you create and that you use in a temporal function. So again, while we've seen up till now images being something that live outside of human beings, they are increasingly becoming temporally based and based in experience, and becoming ways in which information is formed and transmitted and made use of in an artifact that's not necessarily frozen. So I hope you, that's about all of the reading discussion that I'm going to do right now, because I think in some ways responding and talking about text in text, it makes sense. But I will say that over the weekend I will finish comments on each of your work. That I want to email them all at once rather than sending them out one by one. And we will meet next time at 3 o'clock in the Blue Lab. So have a great weekend. Thanks.